Alright, welcome to the Recipe Analyst where I analyze different recipes. Today we're going to be working on one of the recipes from Joshua Weissman's Making Popeyes Chicken at Home But Better. Specifically, we're going to make the improved version of the Popeyes biscuit. I've actually made this recipe before, so if you prefer reading the analysis, you can go to therecipeanalyst.com to read the full analysis of this recipe. But right now I'm going to go ahead and cut the butter into smaller pieces so I can put it in the refrigerator to keep it as cold as possible. This is something that's pretty important in making any kind of bread or pastry that includes butter, at least solid butter in it, because if you let it melt, then it's not gonna be as flaky as if the butter was cold and solid before baking. Now that I have the butter all cut up, I'll go ahead and put that in the refrigerator and move on to my dry ingredients. I'm going to start out with the flour. I like to use a scale, especially when I have larger amounts of flour, but of course you could also use a measuring cup if you don't have a scale. Instead of scooping it up with like a cup measure, I would recommend using a spoon, kind of fluffing up the flour and then spooning it into the cup measure to get a more accurate measurement of your flour. Next, I'm going to add the salt. Followed by the sugar. And I decided to use a spoon to spoon it into the bowl so I can measure out the 3.5 tablespoons, which is 42 grams of sugar. Instead of pouring it, I just didn't think I could be as precise and accurate when pouring it directly out of the canister. Next, we're going to add the cream of tartar. I'm not really sure what this does, but I'll put it on screen once I do a little bit more research on it. So after doing some research, I found that cream of tartar is actually an acid, and it is used as a leavening agent when it's in baking, and it can be a stabilizer in things like a meringue. So it probably acts or reacts with the baking powder in this recipe to help the biscuits rise. So that's why we use cream of tartar in baking. And finally, we're going to add the baking powder. Of course, you could probably mix this just fine, maybe even better by hand, but I'm just following the recipe here, and I'm gonna pulse it a few times to mix it up. See, I told you that the butter wouldn't be in there for too long. So next, I'm going to add it to the food processor. And I'm just going to pulse it a few times. I do end up letting it run on high for a while. So after pulsing it for a little bit, I run my fingers through it just to see what the butter pieces are looking like, and I noticed a few pieces just haven't been broken up at all. So I put the top back on and let it run on high for a little bit and pulse it a few more times just to get those butter particles broken up. I might have let it run a little too much. The goal is to get pea-sized pieces, and I think my piece is a little bit smaller than that, but it ended up working at the end. Next, we're going to transfer our dry mixture with the butter into a medium to large size bowl. A larger size bowl than what I have would probably be a little bit easier for what we're going to be doing next. So essentially what we're going to do is add in our buttermilk pretty slowly to try to rehydrate, well, not rehydrate, but hydrate the flour and all our dry ingredients as evenly as possible. But the way you mix it here, I don't think is too critical to the end result. Just try to get as much of it moistened as possible, because after this you're going to need it all, so that's going to kind of redistribute the buttermilk a little bit more evenly and allow your batter slash dough, well, it's a dough, to hold together and come together a lot easier. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to empty it out onto my clean working surface. And then I'm just going to gather it up, kind of fold it onto itself to bring it together. See, you can see here that there's a pretty good amount of dry flour that hasn't been moistened yet, but just kneading it a few times really gets most of it combined, moistened, and it holds its shape and holds together a lot better just with a few kneads. Next, we're going to work on rolling out our dough and folding it. So just to prevent the dough from sticking to our work surface as much as it would otherwise, we're going to flour both the work surface and the dough. Just trying to get as much dough that had stuck already back into the general mass of dough. Next, we're going to roll out our dough. The goal is to roll it out to 3/4 of an inch thick, but I actually ended up rolling it out a little bit thinner than that. But at the end of the day, it ended up working. Once you have it rolled out, you're going to do a letter style fold, which is folding it into thirds, overlapping itself. Then I'm just going to add a little bit more flour, so when I do this last roll, I have as little sticking as possible for this last roll out. And the more rectangular your dough starts out with, the more rectangular it will end up. So that's why I was just trying to form it into a rectangle before I did this last rolling. I was actually supposed to do this part, which is lining a baking sheet with parchment paper at the beginning when I preheated the oven to 450, but doing it here doesn't really make much of a difference. I'm using a glass to cut out the biscuits because I don't have a biscuit or a cookie cutter. Just find something with a relatively thin lip rim and that is about, what, 3 inches in diameter. And with the scraps, I like to kind of reorganize it, bring it back together, and get a few more biscuits out of it. You could go a lot more times than I'm doing. I'm just going to do it one more time to get even more biscuits. And this time when I roll it out, I'm going to try to leave it a little bit thicker than I did for the majority of the biscuits, just to see what the difference is. But of course, when you do this, the layers will be less defined, and they might rise a little off balance, for lack of better words. They might just tilt during the baking, which is fine. They taste the same. It's just a appearance thing. Next, we're gonna brush the tops of our biscuits with a little bit of buttermilk. I think this is to help them brown on the top. The bottoms don't have any issue browning, but the tops, I guess, I'm just assuming, I'm just thinking that the buttermilk helps them brown on the top. Finally, well, not really finally, we're gonna put them in the oven, and I set a timer for 15 minutes, and that's how long I ended up baking them. And before I start to clean up, I get the honey ready for the topping. Just 3 tablespoons of honey that we're gonna heat over medium heat on the stove. We're not gonna let it boil, but just until it's pretty fluid in the pan, kind of liquidy, loosened up, and get that going. So when the biscuits are done, we could add the butter to the honey and have our salted honey butter topping. Now it's time to clean up, so you can enjoy this sped up version of me cleaning up the kitchen as much as I could in the 15 minutes while the biscuits bake. Immediately after the biscuits came out of the oven, I decided to transfer them to a cooling rack. The recipe doesn't really tell you how long to leave them on the baking sheet before transferring them. I don't think it makes much of a difference other than to your fingers if you can't handle the hot biscuits. The honey had loosened up since it was warm on the stove. So now we're going to work on that salted honey butter topping. Have to cut half a stick of butter to mix into the honey and let it emulsify before brushing the biscuits. The mixing is important just to help the butter emulsify into the honey and make it one cohesive topping rather than, honey and butter separately. And I use unsalted butter, so that's why I added some salt. And just to finish these biscuits off, we're gonna brush that salted honey butter topping on each biscuit, make sure they get a pretty good coating of it, and that's pretty much it. As far as the analysis goes, these took about 40 minutes to make. I'll give them a 2 out of 5 on the difficulty scale, just because You know, making biscuits and making that mess can be a little bit challenging for some people. The ingredients were easy to find. These have a pretty great flavor to me, nice and buttery with some sweetness to them. I gave them a 10 out of 10. But you can go to therecipeanalyst.com and read the more in-depth analysis for more details. Thanks for watching.